Well, Junaid, thank you so much for taking the time to help me with my project.
Not at all.
I was wondering if you could maybe say a few words about yourself.
Well, my name is Junaid Sumro. I'm working as a hospitalist in Conway City, South Carolina. It's been about 9 months. Did my residency from Michigan, and it's been, I would say, close to 4 years that I've been here. And that's like the work part. And other than work, I like to do, drone videos, swimming, and finding about what's going on in the world and things like that.
Wow, so with this COVID-19 thing, you're right on the front lines.
Yeah, when it started, it was really a mess. We would have two or three hallways dedicated to the patients pertaining to this specific condition in the hospital. But now, we've discharged a lot. Some of the patients unfortunately couldn't make. They were in ICU, but those are very small number of patients. Now our pod size is reduced to just one, which is just catering like 6 patients at one time. But we at max have 2 or 3 patients there, waiting for their test results. Before it was like taking 5, 6 days for the test results to come. It's the turnaround is now 48 hours. So its situation's getting better. I guess the hype is gone down, but the only thing I'm worrying about, having known about the Spanish flu in the past is, there could be a second spike, and that could be worse than the first one. So we need to be careful. I mean, we are following all the precautions. So let's see what will happen.
Now, it's kind of interesting. I mean, everything is opening up, but I mean, other than what you mentioned about being able to do testing in 48 hours and maybe our ability to test has increased, it doesn't seem like anything's fundamentally changed. I mean, the
Um,
disease.
I mean, before, the ER physicians who were at triage, they would like pretty much test everybody. If someone is reporting only one symptom, be it fever or cough, which is could be related to his COPD or anything, but they would just swab everybody. But now they are like, if there's high suspicion, then they're testing them. Um, So, and then, before we did not had a good patient number in the hospital, less people were coming in. I mean, of course, everybody was staying at home, but now the patient number is starting to go up. So, I mean, how long can we be in the lockdown? And things have to start rolling, and it has to be with responsibility and with all the precautions and guidelines to decrease the spread or transmission.
I know that's a good point. I have a cousin in upstate New York, and she's part of the Open New York movement. And they got a billboard showing, unemployment going up and, evictions going up and, all these other things are like, we need to flatten those curves too.
Yeah, I mean it's really bad. The situation's bad in the New York City. There have been so many models. I mean, in different countries when they're like kind of tracing the exposed people and just doing the restrictions in those particular areas. So I don't know how things are gonna work. We'll see over the next couple of weeks, how things are turning around.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like maintain maximum social distancing. And if everything turns out to be okay, then I just look a little goofy or ridiculous. But then if it turns out to be really, really bad, then, at least you have a little bit more control over that. Whereas, um,
Yeah, I mean, there's a vulnerable population, um, elderly, of course. Studies suggest that, it doesn't affect kids that much, but I mean, of course, there's been reporting that there are few that are affected, but it's mostly elderly and the ones with comorbidities. They has to be cautious, more careful and cautious, and us, even if we are at less risk of getting the disease. I mean, we may be exposed, but just for the sake of those elderly population, not to transmit if the people like us are carriers. So that is kind of a responsibility and precautions on our part.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest concern. My 83-year-old in-laws live with me. So it's like I think I would probably be okay and my wife be okay and my children be okay, but they would be in the high risk category.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, well, maybe talk about something hopefully a little bit more cheerful. Uh, did you know that we were planning to land people on the moon in 2024?
I've heard about it, but actually, there's been less talk about people going to moon lately. I mean, in the news channels, it's not highlighted as we would read as kids in the books. Like the people landed on the moon was maybe around what 1970 or something. Neil Armstrong was the first one, but that's like the most highlighted thing. People say the first is always remembered and the second person is not, and there's not much that's in the media that we could learn about as to what after the first landing. But um as far as I know, I mean, there was this thing in the news that India was trying to land there recently. It was recently, and they were not successful. But I heard about China also trying to get person or their people walk on the moon. But I guess there's been so many missions to the moon trying to see what can be done about it in terms of you know life, potential life there, and things like that. But 2024, I did not know that this is what we're doing in this particular year.
Yeah, last year, China landed a rover on the moon in January, and then Israel tried to land a probe on the moon. It crashed, and then India
Oh,
sent an orbiter and a lander. The orbiter was fine. It's like going around the moon, making observations, what have you. But the lander, like you said, had an anomaly right before it landed, and it crashed into the surface.
oh,
But I think China is landing another probe on the moon at the end of this year. And then there was some talk about India making another attempt. And then next year, we have two US companies landing probes on the moon, one in Houston, Intuitive Machines, and then one in Pittsburgh, which is Astrobotics, both under contract with NASA. But the Astrobotics one's kind of interesting. They hit doing this thing with DHL, and you can actually send something to the moon on their craft in a little moon box.
oh wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be small, like something the size of a penny would cost you like $300, but still, um, not currently available. Kind of unique, it's more of a publicity stunt than anything practical. But mm.
So it's
uh,
like kind of a package they're gonna leave on the moon, or that's what it is.
yeah, the probe just lands on the moon. It has its instruments on it, and it will remain there
Oh,
um,
okay.
until maybe your great great grandchildren go there and go, oh, that's what he sent to the moon.
Yeah. Right.
So what do you think about that? I mean, do you think that's a good thing, or maybe it's like misplaced priorities, or I mean, like, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it's good to explore and search in terms of what could be the limits of life outside of Earth. I've watched a lot of movies based on space and uh, the planet Mars, and so it's kind of interesting, like things are so different there than they are here, but this curious nature of human, and they're trying to um, explore, beyond our planet. It's kind of interesting, that how things work there. I think it's different as far as I know from the movies and what we read when we were kids. Is the gravity situation is different. I guess it's what, four one fourth or one fifth of Earth there on the moon.
1/7, if you could believe that.
Oh, one seventh, yeah. So you lose weight when you and so I mean, like, moving around there, it's different than they're trying to see, if humans can survive there, what is the composition of soil there, if there is water or not. As far as I can recall, they were saying that there are some signs of water being there. Um, the moon also revolves like Earth, on its own axis, but that's different. I think the days and nights both are lengthier there. So it's a whole lot different. It would be interesting to see if there is the possibility that humans can live there, you know. And we are still figuring out. I don't know how long we're gonna take, but 2024 is another attempt to to towards that goal. So we're learning new things, and I think it's interesting.
Yeah. In terms of the water, the moon only has like a 1 degree tilt relative to the sun, and it has like these really deep craters on the poles. And there's areas on the pole where it's like permanently shadowed, and it's like colder than the surface of Pluto there. So any water molecule that goes there will get like frozen and stay there. And so it looks like over billions of years, there's like tons and tons of water ice frozen in the poles. Which kind of
Oh, so there is water, so that's kind of reassuring, if there would be any possibility of humans, staying.
yeah. I mean, we would have. I mean, there's no atmosphere, so it would have to be like a contained um, thing. But at least you have water to drink, water for the food. You get to break it apart and use it for rocket fuel. But so whenever you envision like your hopes for humanity 500 years in the future, what kind of comes to mind?
Um, we have been in this age. I was a 90s kid, and the cell phones just started. There were so heavy cell phones with lesser functions, more buttons, small screens, black and white. And then I compare that time to now, so much has changed. The things that we have seen, there's so much advancement in technology. So I cannot even imagine what's going to happen after 500 years. It's going to be so much different for sure, and it's so convenient now. I think it's just the whole world is going to be at your fingertips, I guess. in 500 years. Technology is what I'm talking about, and then exploring about these options of beyond Earth. Maybe, like, there were two cartoon series, Flintstones and the Jetsons. So I guess we would be in that era of Jetsons with the cars flying and uh, things like that.
And so 500 years from now, you think we exist. So we would you're hopeful that we'll make it.
um yeah, that's another thing. I never thought about that. The way climate change is happening, maybe that's why we are exploring options to go somewhere other than Earth. But I'm not sure. I mean, of course, definitely when there's this industrialization area, there's so much um, ejections, the byproducts into the atmosphere, damaging the atmosphere. I don't know if humanity or the planet Earth is gonna survive that long. We have this protected layer of ozone that is kind of getting destroyed, especially at over certain parts of the world. I don't know how it's gonna sustain it. Kind of, maybe I heard, recovered some with our social distancing for 2 months, but we'll be back into business in no time. So um, it's hard to say. I mean, in terms of technology perspective, you know, the way I told you, I was a '90s kid, and so much has changed. Technology probably would, be somewhere at some point that I can't even imagine in 500 years. But at the same token, the climate change that's going on, I don't know if the Earth would be in the same condition that it is right now in 500 years.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, I will. Okay, how about something simpler? In 500 years, do you think there's people living on the moon, Mars, the moons of Jupiter, the moons of Saturn? I mean, like, how far do you think we physically expanded out into the solar system?
Um, I think it's just going to be nearby. It's not going to be possible to go that far, the Jupiter or Saturn, or maybe there'll be a lot of advancements, I guess, trying to figure out ways how to live on the moon or at max Mars is what I think. I don't think it's going to go beyond that because it requires a lot of going there, doing multiple trips, and requires a lot of funding and studying everything. It's been a span of, I guess, how many, 50 years since the humans first landed on the moon, and we still have to figure out a lot of things. So if I'm kind of extrapolating that in terms of human capability, I think the max I can think of is maybe figuring out a way to live on the moon or Mars.
And some people say that we shouldn't go to the moon, shouldn't go to Mars because we've messed up the Earth. We shouldn't mess up those places too. What What's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, messing up Earth is, there are so many ecosystems that we know, and human activity has kind of, you know, caused turbulence in those ecosystems. But as far as we know, till date, there are no living beings in those planets, and I think it's worth exploring if the life is possible there. Destroying the system, I think, because it's harmful for other living creatures living here. But since nobody's there, it's worth exploring, and I think you're not risking anything.
And some people are like, well, we have problems here on Earth. We have people who are hungry, people who aren't getting medical care, people who are living in much poorer conditions, healthcare. Why are we going to the moon when we have all these problems, and we really should take care of those first? I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of poverty, um, and there are so many organizations that are working, but they never would be enough. Um, but it depends on the interests of different countries and different governments, and the rich and the poor, with this line of demarcation. And it's about the people's perceptions. And there are so many people who are willing to help, but there are not many people who would give up their everything trying to um, feed the poor and everything. And um, there is, this fixed amount of money that's being dedicated to technology and this kind of stuff. um, I mean, I think more should be done, to help the poor. And there are so many countries, fighting with this poverty. At one point, I read that, if the rich people give up their money, or maybe even portions of it, less than half portion would be enough to feed every poor person in the world. But it's all about priorities, and I don't think everybody thinks like that. And everybody has an opinion as a general population, including me, but I don't think it's, this perception can't can be generalized into all the people living in this world, and it's just not going to happen.
Hmm. And if it became safe and affordable, would you have any interest in going into space? Oh, yes. Would you have any interest in going into space yourself?
um I am really scared. I mean, I'm scared even when I take those rides at the parks, amusement parks. But I did when, under peer pressure, and it was horrible. But so space would obviously scare me a lot, especially after watching, all those movies. And what if you lose connection, and then you're stuck, you can't come back. um so I would not, but I mean, I would love to know, the people who are willing to risk it, and they're going and, finding information for the sake of humanity, and for the purpose of getting more information. I think it's worth it.
Well, and you're thinking of being strapped into a capsule on the end of a rocket, and you feel like all this pressure on you, and you're going to space. But there's also been talk about a space elevator where you put like a mass over the equator in geosynchronous orbit, and you have like a thin cord that goes all the way down to the surface, and then you have things that can crawl up that cord where it may take you a week to get from the surface to orbit, but it's like a really gentle ride. If something like that was developed, would that kind of affect your? I mean, it'd be like a really, really, really tall building, right? So if you have any fear of heights like I do, maybe it's not so fun. But what do you think about that?
I mean, if they are introducing these kind of, just to ensure that, there's less chance of you getting stranded on the moon, and we have so much to back you up. And after I'm done doing what I want to in my lifetime, I'll take this chance afterwards as an adventure. But I don't know. I mean, if it's going to be affordable, it costs a lot. So I don't know if it's going to be that common for people to go. Maybe later, not if not sooner. We're talking about maybe 100 years or something.
Well, I mean, one reason why spaceflight's so expensive is you build a rocket, you launch it, you throw it away, and next time you want to launch something in space, you have to build a new one. And SpaceX has been developing reusable rockets, and they're building the largest rocket that'll be 100% reusable currently in Brownsville, Texas. Um, and they're talking about flights on that being equivalent to like first class international flights in terms of cost.
Oh wow.
Um, so, and I mean, and they're actually building that and testing that like right now as we speak. I mean, like their operations have really expanded. So I think it might be like the iPhone. Can you imagine, like, before the iPhone came out, people are like, "Oh, you'll never have high-speed internet and video chat and all this other good stuff." And then it comes out, and people are like, "Oh, of course you have it." So I think we're right on the edge of that moment when it comes to space.
Yeah, I mean, if I never thought of like that, so it's the non-reusable property of the rockets. That's why it's expensive. So if that's a major breakthrough, then if they're making the reusable ones, maybe that would speed up having people to afford this. You know, the people who are adventurous by nature, and probably this tourism is what we're talking about.
Or even point to
So,
point Earth travel. They're saying, you could go from like yeah, from Florida to China in like 30 minutes.
oh wow, that's great.
I mean, could you imagine you go there at the end of your day in Florida, you arrive in China, and a stay there, you have a meeting, whatever, you come back before anybody wakes up and you're back home.
That's mind blowing, you know, because I take these flights, you know, maybe once a year, and that takes me like close to 24 hours to reach from one point of the world to the other, and 30 minutes sounds very good to me.
And
um,
you'll get to see Earth from space also, and you'll get a few minutes of floating, and maybe a few minutes of terror too. So it won't be quite as.
yeah, that's very very interesting. That thing I can try if that becomes affordable and available and common, rather than going all the way to the moon.
But I really appreciate your time. Did you have any like additional comments in closing?
No, I mean, you made me think, you know, in a different way, so I thank you for that. You know, it's a different kind of world, different perspective, and I think you're doing a great job.
I
And
really.
and I rem and I remember you, because of the fact that I, you know, I came to Uncle Ijaz's place first time in Houston 2016, and we were kind of recording a video outside the community center, and it was very interesting for me to see you having command over the language that we speak, you know. So I really liked it.
I've also interviewed Ejaz, and I should send you his recording um, as
Oh,
well. So we had a good
no,
talk.
that's good. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.